The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. I had called upon my friend Sherlock Holmes upon the second morning after Christmas, with the intention of wishing him the compliments of the season. He was lounging upon a sofa in a purple dressing-gown, with a pipe rack within his reach upon the right, and a pile of crumpled newspapers, evidently newly studied, near his right. Beside the couch was a wooden chair, and the angle of the back hung a very seedy and disreputable hard felt hat, much the worse for wear, and cracked in several places. A lens and a forceps lying upon a seat of the chair suggested that the hat had been suspended in that manner for the purpose of examination. "You're not engaged," said I. "Perhaps I interrupt you." "Not at all. I am glad to have a friend with whom I can discuss my results. The matter is perfectly a trivial one." He jerked his thumb in the direction of the old hat. "But there are points in connection with which I cannot entirely devoid of interest and even of instruction." I seated myself upon this armchair and warmed my hands before the crackling fire, for a sharp frost had set in, and the windows were thick with ice crystals. "I suppose," I remarked, "that homely as it looks, the thing has some deadly story linked to it. That it is the clue which will guide you to the solution of some mystery and the punishment of some crime." No, no crime," said Sherlock Holmes, laughing. "Only one of the whimsical little incidents which will happen when you have 4,000,000 human beings jostling each other within the space of a few square miles. Amid the action and reaction of so dense a swarm of humanity, every possible combination of events may be expected to take place, and many of the little problems will be presented which may be striking and bizarre without being criminal. We have already had experiences of such." "So much so," I remarked, "that the last 6 cases which I have added to my notes, 3 have been entirely free of any legal crime." "Precisely. You allude to my attempt to recover the Irene Adler papers, to the singular case of Miss Mary Sutherland, and to the adventure of the man with his twisted lip. Well, I have no doubt that this small matter will fall to the same innocent category. You know Patterson, the commissionaire?" "Yes." "It is to him that this trophy belongs." "Is this his hat?" No, he found it. The owner is unknown. I beg that you will look upon it, not as a battered billycock, but an intellectual problem. And first, how to know it came to here. It arrived on Christmas morning in the company of a good fat goose, which is, I have no doubt, roasting at this moment in front of Peterson's fire. The facts are these. About 4 o'clock on Christmas morning, Peterson, who, as you know, is a very honest fellow, was returning from a small jollification, and was making his way homeward through Tottenham Court Road. In front of him he saw, in the gaslight, a tallish man walking with a slight stagger and carrying a white goose slung over his shoulder. As he reached the corner of Gold Street, a row broke out between the stranger and a little knot of rows. One of the latter knocked off the man's hat, on which he raised his stick to defend himself, and swinging it over his head, smashed the top window behind him. Peterson had rushed forward to protect the stranger from the assailants, but the man, shocked at having broken a window and seeing an official-looking person in uniform rushing towards him, dropped his goose, took on to his heels, and vanished amid the labyrinth of small streets which lie at the back of Tottenham Court Road. The roughs had also fled at the appearance of Peterson, so that he was left in possession of the field of battle, and also of the spoils of victory in the shape of this battered hat and a most unimpeachable Christmas goose, which surely he restored to the owner. My dear fellow, there lies the problem. It is true that for Mrs. Henry Baker, was printed upon the small card which was tied to the bird's left leg. It is also true that the initials HB are legible upon the lining of his hat. But there are some thousands of Bakers and some hundreds of Henry Bakers in this city of ours. It is not easy to restore lost property to any one of them. What did Peterson do? He brought both round, the hat and the goose, to me on Christmas morning, knowing that even the smallest problems are of interest to me. The goose we retained until this morning, when there were signs that, in spite of the slight frost, it would be well that it should be eaten without unnecessary delay. Its finder has carried it off, therefore, to fulfill the ultimate destiny of the goose, while I continue to retain the hat for the unknown gentleman who lost his Christmas dinner. Did you not advertise? No. Then what clue could you have to his identity? Only as much as we can deduce. From the hat? Precisely. But you're joking. What can you gather from this old battered felt? Here is my lens. You know my methods. What can you gather from the individuality of the man who has worn this article? I took the tattered object in my hands and turned it over carefully. It was a very ordinary black hat of the usual round shape, hard and much worse to wear. The lining had been a red silk, but it was a good deal discolored. There was no maker's name, but as the Holmes had remarked, the initials H.B. were scrawled upon one side. It was pierced in the brim with a hat secure, but the elastic was missing. For the rest, it was cracked, exceedingly dusty, and spotted in several places, although there seemed to have been some attempt to hide the discolored patches by smearing the hat with ink. I see nothing, I said, handing it back to my friend. On the contrary, Watson, you see everything. You fail, however, to reason from what you see. You are too timid in your drawing of references. Then pray, tell me what it is that you infer from this hat. He picked it up and gazed at it in a particular perspective fashion, which was characteristic of him. It is perhaps less suggestive than it might have been, he remarked. And yet, there are a few instances which are very distinct, and a few others which represent at least a strong balance of probability. That the man was highly intellectual is of course obvious upon the face of it, and also that he is fairly well-to-do within the last 3 years, although he has now fallen upon evil days. He had foresight, but he has less than that formerly, pointing to a moral retrogression, which, when taken with the decline of his fortunes, seems to indicate some ill influences, probably drink, at work upon him. This may account to the obvious fact that his wife ceased to love him. Wow. My dear Holmes! He has, however, retained some degree of self-respect. He continued, disregarding my taunts. Here's a man who leads a sedentary life, goes out little, is out of training entirely, is middle-aged, has grizzled hair, which he has cut within the last few days, and which he anoints with lime cream. There are the more patient facts which can be deduced from this hat. Also, by the way, that is extremely improbable that he has gas laid on in his house. You're certainly joking, Holmes. Not in the least. It is possible that even now, when I give you these results, you are unable to see how they are attained. I have no doubt that I am very stupid, but I must confess that I am unable to follow you. For example, how did you deduce that this man was intellectual? For answer, Holmes clasped the hat upon his head. It came right over his forehead and settled upon the bridge of his nose. It is a question of cubic capacity, he said. A man with so large a brain must have something in it. The decline of his fortunes, then? This hat is 3 years old. These flat brims curled on the edge came in then. It is a hat of a very best quality. Look at the band of rubbed silk, and the excellent lining. If this man could afford to buy so expensive a hat 3 years ago, and has had no hat since, then he has assuredly gone down in the world. Oh, that is clear enough, certainly. But how about the foresight and the moral retrogression? Sherlock Holmes laughed. Here is the foresight, said he, putting his finger in the little disc and loop of the hat secure. There are never sold upon hats. This man ordered one. It is a sign of a certain amount of foresight, since he went out of his way to make this precaution elastic, and he has not troubled to replace it. It is obvious that he has less foresight now than he had formerly, which is a different proof of his weakening condition. On the other hand, he has endeavored to conceal some of the stains upon the felt by daubing them with ink, which is a sign that he has not entirely lost his self-respect. Your reasoning's certainly plausible. The further point is that he is middle-aged, and this hat is grizzled. That has been recently cut, and he uses lime green, are all that can be gathered from a close examination of the lower part of the lining. The lens discloses a large number of hair ends, clean cut by the scissors of the barber. They all appear to be adhesive, and there is a distinct odor of lime cream. The dust, you will observe, is not the gritty gray dust of the street, but the fluffy brown dust of the house, showing that it has been hung up indoors most of the time. All the marks of moisture upon the inside are proof positive that the wearer perspired very freely, and could, therefore, hardly be in the best of training. But his wife, you said that she had ceased to love him. This hat has not been brushed for weeks. When I see you, my dear Watson, with the week's accumulation of dust upon your hat, and when your wife allows you to go out in such a state, I shall fear that you have been unfortunate enough to lose your wife's affection. But he might be a bachelor. Nay, he has been bringing home the goose in peaceful offering to his wife. Remember the card about the bird's leg. You have an answer for everything. But how on earth did you deduce that the gas was not laid in on his house? One tallow stain, or even two, might come by chance, but when you see no less than 5, I think that there can be little doubt that the individual must be brought into a frequent contact with burning tallow. Walks upstairs at night, probably with his hat on, and a guttering candle in the other. Anyhow, we must now got gallows stains from a gas jet. Are you satisfied? Well, it is very ingenious, I said, laughing. But since, as you said just now, there has been no crime committed and no harm done save for the loss of a goose, all this seems to be rather a waste of energy. Sherlock Holmes had opened his mouth to reply, when the door flew open, and Peterson, the commissionaire, rushed in the apartment with flushed cheeks and the face of a man who was dazed with astonishment. "The goose, Mr. Holmes! The goose, sir!" he gasped. "Eh? What of it, then? Has it returned to life and flapped away through your kitchen window?" Holmes twisted himself round to the sofa to get a fairer view of the man's excited face. "You see, sir, see what my wife found in his crop." He held out his hand and displayed upon the center of the palm a brilliantly scintillating blue stone, rather smaller than the bean in size, but of such purity and radiance that it twinkled like an electric point in the dark hollow of his hand. Sherlock Holmes sat up with a whistle. "By Jove, Peterson," he said, "this is a treasure trove indeed. I suppose you know what you have got?" "A diamond, sir, a precious stone. It cuts into glass as though it were putty." "It is more than a precious stone. It is the precious stone." "Not the Countess of Morcair's blue carbuncle?" I ejaculated. Precisely so. I ought to know its size and shape, seeing that I've read the advertisement about it in the Times every day lately. It is absolutely unique, and its value can only be conjectured by the reward offered of £1,000. Is certainly not within the 20th part of the market price. £1,000? Good Lord of mercy! The Commissioner flopped down into the chair and stared in his hand and then to the other. That is the reward, and I have reason to know that there are sentimental considerations with the background, from which would induce a countess to part with half her fortune if she could but recover the gem. It was lost, if I remember all right, from the Hotel Cosmopolitan, I remarked. Precisely so. On December 22nd, just 5 days ago, John Horner, a plumber, was accused of having abstracted it from the lady's jewel case. The evidence against him was so strong that the case had been referred to the assizes. I have some account of the matter there, I believe. He rummaged round his papers, glancing over the dates until he last smoothed one out, doubled it over, and read it the following paragraph. Hotel Cosmopolitan, jewel robbery, John Horner, 26, plumber, was brought up upon the charges of having on the 22nd instant abstracted from the jewel case of the Countess of Morcar the valuable gem known as the Blue Carbuncle. John Ryder, upper attendant at the hotel, gave his evidence to the effect that he had shown Horner up from the dressing room of the Countess of Morcar upon the day of the robbery in order that he might solder a second bar in the grate, which was loose. He had remained with Horner a little time, and then finally been called away. On returning, he found that Horner had disappeared, and that the bureau had been forced open, and that a small morocco casket in which, as it afterwards transpired, the Countess was accustomed to keep her jewel, was lying open upon the dressing-table. Ryder instantly gave the alarm, and Horner was arrested the same evening. But the stone could not be found, either upon his person or in his rooms. Catherine Cusack, maid to the Countess, disposed of having heard Ryder's cry of dismay on discovering the robbery, and having rushed into the room where she had found matters as described by the last witness. Inspector Broadstreet, B Division, had given evidence to the arrest of Horner, who struggled frantically and protested his innocence in the strongest of terms. Evidence of the previous conviction of robbery having been given against the prisoner, the magistrate refused to deal summarily with the office, but referred it to the assizes. Horner, who had shown signs of intense emotion during the proceedings, fainted away at the conclusion and was carried out of the court. So much for the police court, said Holmes thoughtfully, tossing aside the paper. The question for us now is to solve the sequence of events leading up to this rifled jewel case on one end of the crop of the goose in the other, and Tottenham Court Road at the other. You see, Watson, our little deductions have suddenly assumed a much more important and less innocent aspect. Hero is the stone. The stone came from the goose, and the goose came from Mr. Henry Baker, a gentleman with a bad hat, and all the other characteristics which I have bored you. We must set ourselves seriously to finding this gentleman, and ascertaining what part he has played in this little mystery. To do so, we must try the simplest means, and these lie undoubtedly in the advertisement in all the evening papers. If this fail, I shall have recourse to use other methods. What will you say? Give me a pencil and that slip of paper. Now then. Found at the corner of Goodge Street, a goose and a black felt hat. Mr. Henry Baker can have the same by applying at 6:30 this evening at 221B Baker Street. That is clear and concise. Very, but will we see it? Well, he's sure to keep an eye on the papers, since, to a poor man, the loss was a heavy one. He was clearly so scared by his mischance in breaking the window, and by the approach of Peterson, that he thought nothing of flight. But since then, he must be bitterly regretted the impulse which caused him to drop his bird. Then again, the introduction of his name will cause him to see it, for everyone who knows him will direct his attention to it. Here you are, Peterson. Run down to the advertising agency and have this put in the evening papers. And which, sir? Oh, in the Globe, Star, Pall Mall, St. Evenings, Evening News Standard, Echo, and any of the others that might occur to you. Very well, sir. And the stone? Ah, yes. I shall keep the stone. Thank you. And I may say, Peterson, just buy a goose on your way back and leave it with me here, for we must have one to give the gentleman in place of the one which your family is now devouring. When the commissioner had gone, Holmes took up the stone and held it against the light. It's a bonny thing, he said. See how it glints and sparkles. Of course, it is the nucleus and focus of a crime. Every good stone is. They are the devil's pet baits. And the larger and more older gems of every facet may stand for a bloody deed. This stone is not yet 20 years old. It was found in the banks of the Amoy River in southern China, and is remarkable for having every characteristic of a carbuncle, save for it is blue in shade instead of ruby red. In spite of its youth, it has already a sinister history. There have been 2 murders, a vitriol throwing, a suicide, and several robberies brought about by the sake of a 40-grain weight of crystallized charcoal. Who would think that so pretty a toy would be the purveyor of the gallows and the prison? I'll lock it up in my strong-box and drop a line to the Countess to say we have it. Do you think that this man Horner is innocent? I cannot tell. Hey, Sammy. Yeah, the sound alerts still aren't working. Sorry. Cannot figure out what's going on with those. Oh, then do you imagine that this other one, Henry Baker, has anything to do with the matter? It is, I think, much more likely that Henry Baker is an absolutely innocent man, who had no idea the bird which he was carrying was of considerably more value than if it were made of solid gold. That, however, I shall determine by the very simple test if we have an answer to our advertisement. And you can do nothing until then? Nothing. Oh, in that case, I shall continue my professional round. But I shall come back in the evening at the hour you have mentioned, for I should like to see the solution of this very tangled business. Very glad to see you. I dine at 7. There's a woodcock, I believe. By the way, in view of the recent occurrences, perhaps I might ask Mrs. Hudson to examine its crop. I had been delayed at case, and it had been a little after 6:30 when I found myself at Baker Street once more. As I approached the house, I saw a tall man in a Scotch bonnet with a coat that was buttoned all the way up to his chin, waiting outside in a bright semicircle which was thrown by the fanlight. Just as I arrived at the door was opened, and he was shown up together to Holmes's room. "Mr. Henry Baker, I presume?" said he, raising from his armchair and greeting the visitor with an easy air of geniality which he could so readily assume. "Pray take the chair by the fire, Mr. Baker. It is a cold night, and I observe that your circulation is more adept for summer than for winter. Ah, Watson, you've just come at the right time. Is that your hat, Mr. Baker?" "Yes, sir, that is indubitably my hat." He was a large man with rounded shoulders and a massive head. and a broad, intelligent face sloping down to a pointed beard of grizzled brown. A touch of red in the nose and cheeks, and a slight tremor in his extended hand recalled Holmes's surmise of his habits. His rusty black frock coat was buttoned right up to the front, and the collar turned up, and his lank wrists protruding from his sleeves without a sign of cuff or shirt. He spoke in a slow, staccato fashion, choosing his words with care, and gave the impression generally of a man of learning and letters who had an ill usage at the hands of fortune. "We have retained these things for you from some days," said Holmes, "because we expected you to see the advertisement in the giving of your address. I am at a loss to know why you did not advertise." Our visitor gave a rather shameful laugh. "Shillings had not been so plentiful to me as they once were," he remarked. "I had no doubt that the gang of roughs who assaulted me had carried off both the bird and hat. I did not care to spend any money on the hopeless attempt at recovering them." "Very naturally, by the way. About the bird. Were you compelled to eat it?" "To eat it?" Our visitor rose half from his chair in excitement. "Yes, it would have been of no use to anyone had we not done so. But I presume that this is other goose on the sideboard, which is about the same weight and height. Perfectly fresh, will answer your purpose equally well." "Oh, certainly, certainly," answered the baker with a sigh of relief. "Of course, we still have the feathers, legs, and crop of your own bird, if you wish." The man burst out with a hearty laugh. "They might be useful to me as relics of my adventure," he said, "but beyond that I can hardly see any use of disjecta my late acquaintance are going to be to me. No, sir, I think that, with your permission, I will confine my attentions to the excellent bird which I perceive upon the sideboard." Sherlock Holmes glanced sharply across at me with a slight shrug of his shoulders. "There's your hat, and then there's your bird," he said. "By the way, would it bore you to tell me where you got the other one from? I'm somewhat of a local fowl fancier, and I have seldom seen a better grown goose." Certainly, sir," said Baker, who had risen and tucked the newly gained property under his arm. "There are a few of us who frequent the Alpha Inn near the museum. But we are found in the museum itself during the day, you understand. This is our good host, Windigate by name, instituted a goose club, by which, on consideration of a few pence a week, we are each to receive a bird at Christmas. My pence were duly paid, and the rest is familiar to you. I am much indebted to you, sir, for a Scotch bonnet has fitted better to my ears nor my gravity." With the comical prosperity of manner, he bowed solemnly to both of us and strode off on his way. "So much for Henry Baker," said Holmes as he closed the door behind him. "It is quite certain that he knows nothing whatsoever of the matter. Are you hungry, Watson?" "Not particularly." "Then I suggest that we turn our dinner into a supper and follow up on this clue while it is hot." "By all means." It was a bitter night, so we drew in our ulcers and wrapped cravats around our throats. Outside, the stars were shining coldly in a cloudless sky, and the breath of the passer-bys blew out into smoke like the many pistol shots. Are they eloquent? Our footfalls rang crisply and loudly as we swung through the doctor's quarters. Walpole Street, Harley Street, and then through Wingmore Street into the Oxford Street. In a quarter of an hour we were at Bloomsbury in the Alpha Inn, which is a small public house at the corner of one of the streets which runs into Holborn. Holmes pushed open the door into the private bar and ordered 2 glasses of beer from the ruddy-faced, white-aproned landlord. Address. "Your beer should be excellent, if it is as good as your geese," he said. My geese, said the man seemed surprised. Yes, I was speaking only half an hour ago to Mr. Henry Baker, who was a member of your goose club. Ah, yes, I see. But you see, them's not our geese. Indeed. Whose then? Well, I got 24 from the salesman in Covent Garden. Indeed. I know some of them. Which is it? Breckenridge is his name. Ah, I don't know him. Well, here's to your good health, landlord, and the prosperity of your house. Good night. Now for Mr. Breckenridge, he continued, buttoning up his coat as we came out into the frosty air. Remember, Watson, that though we have so homely a thing as a goose at one end of this chain, we have at the other end a man who certainly gets 7 years penal servitude unless we can establish his innocence. It is possible that we may have a line of investigation which has been missed by the police, and which a singular chance has placed in our hands. Let us follow it out to the bitter end. Faces to the south, then, and quick march. We passed across Holborn, down Endell Street, and through the zigzags of slums of Covent Garden Market. One of the largest stalls bore the name of Breckenridge upon it, and the proprietor, a horsey-looking man with a sharp face and trim side whiskers. He was helping a boy put up his shutters. Good evening. It's a cold night, said Holmes. The salesman nodded and shot a questioning glance at my companion. Sold out, I see. And the geese, continued Holmes, pointing at the bare slabs of marble. Let you have 500 tomorrow morning. That's no good. Oh, there's some in the stall with the gas flare. Ah, but I was recommended by you. Who by? By the landlord of the Alpha. Ah, yes, I sent him a couple of dozen. Fine birds they were, too. Now, where did you get them from? To my surprise, the question provoked a burst of anger from the salesman. Now then, mister, he said, with his head cocked and arms akimbo. Arms akimbo, cool. What are you driving at? Let's have it out straight now. It is straight enough. I should like to know who sold you these geese which is supplied to the Alpha. Well then, I shan't tell you, so now. Oh, it is a matter of no importance, but I don't know why you should be so warm over such a trifle. Warm? You'd be as warm, maybe, if you were pestered as I am. When I pay good money for a good article, there should be an end to this business. But it's, where are these geese, and who did you sell the geese to, and what will you take for these geese? One would think that they're the only geese in the world. To hear the fuss that's made over them. Well, I have no connection with any other people who have been making inquiries, said Holmes carefully. If you won't tell me, the bet is off. That is all. But I'm always ready to back my opinion in the matter of fowls. And I have a fiver on it that the bird I ate was country bred. Well, then, you've lost your fiver, for it's town bred, snapped the salesman. It's nothing of the kind. I say it is. I don't believe it. Don't you think I know my own fowls better than I do? You've handled them ever since I was a nipper. I tell you, all those birds that went to the Alpha were town bred. You'll never persuade me to believe that. Will you bet me then? It's merely taking your money, for I know I am right. But I'll have a sovereign on with you. Teach you not to be so obstinate. The salesman chuckled grimly. Bring me the books, Bill, he said. The small boy brought a round, thin volume and a great, greasy-backed one, laying them all out together beneath the hanging lamp. Now then, Mr. Cocksure, said the salesman, I thought that I was out of geese, but before I finish, you'll find out that this is still the one left in my shop. You see this little book? Well, that's the list of the folks from whom I buy. Do you see? Well then, here on this page, the country folk and the numbers of the names and the wedge of their accounts in the big ledger. Now then, you see this other page with red ink? Well, that's the list of the town suppliers. Now look at this third name. Just read it out and tell me. Mrs. Oakshott, 117, Brixton Road, 249. Read Holmes. Quite so. Now turn that up in the ledger. Holmes turned the page indicated. Here you are. Mrs. Oakshott, 117 Brixton Road, egg and poultry supplier. Now then, what's the last entry? December 22nd, 24 geese at 7 cents 5 dough. Quite so, there you are. And underneath? Sold to Mr. Windigates at the Alpha at 12 cents. What have you to say now? Sherlock Holmes looked deeply chagrined. He drew a sovereign out of his pocket and threw it down on the slab, turning away with the air of a man whose disgust is too deep for words. A few yards off, he stomped under a lamp-post and laughed in a hearty, noiseless fashion which was peculiar of him. When you see a man with whiskers of that cut and the punk and protruding out of his pockets, you can always draw him into a bet, he said. I dare say that as I had put £100 down in front of him, that man would have not given me such a complete information as I was drawing from him the idea that he was doing me in on a wager. Well, Watson, we are, I fancy, nearing the end of our quest, and the only point which remains to be determined is whether we should go on to this Mrs. Oakshott tonight, or whether we should reserve that for tomorrow. It is clear from what the surly fellow said that there are others besides ourselves who are anxious about the matter. And I should... His remarks were suddenly cut off short by a loud hubbub which broke out in the stall which we had just left. Turning round, we saw a little rat-faced fellow standing in the centre of the circle of yellow light which was thrown by the swinging lamp, while Breckenridge, the salesman, framed in the door of a stall, was shaking his fists fiercely at the cringing figure. "I've had enough of you and your geese," he shouted. "I wish you were the devil himself. If you come to pestering me any more about your silly talk, I'll set your dog on you. You bring Mrs. Oakshott here and I'll answer her. What have you to do with it? Did I buy the geese off you?" "No, but one of them was mine, all the same," whined the little man. "Well, then go ask Miss Oakshott for it." "She told me to ask you." "Well, you can ask the King of Prussia, for all I care. I've had enough of it. Get off this." He rushed fiercely forward, and the inquirer flitted away in the darkness. "Ha! This may save us a visit from Brixton Road," whispered Holmes. "Come with me, and we shall see what is made of this fellow." Striding through the scattered knots of people who lounged in the flaring stalls, my companion speedily overtook the little man and touched him upon the shoulder. He sprang around, and I could see in the gaslight the very vestige of colour which had driven from his face. "Who are you? What do you want?" he asked in a quavering voice. "If you will excuse me," said Holmes blatantly, "but I could not help overhearing the questions you put to the salesman just now. I think that I could be of some assistance to you." "You? Who are you? How could you know anything of the matter?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes. It is my business to know what other people don't know." "You can know nothing of this." "Excuse me, I know everything of it. You are endeavouring to trace some geese which were sold by Mrs. Oakshott of Brixton Road to the salesman named Breckenridge, and turned by him to Mr. Windigate of the Alpha, and by him to this club, of which Henry Baker is a member." Oh, sir, you're a very man I have longed to meet, cried the little fellow with outstretched hands and quivering fingers. I can hardly explain to you how interested I am in this matter. Sherlock Holmes hailed a four-wheeler which was passing by. In that case, we had better discuss it in a cozy room rather than this windswept marketplace, said he. But pray tell me, before we go any further, who is it that I have the pleasure of meeting? The man hesitated for an instant. My name is John Robinson, he answered in a sidelong glance. No, the real name, said Holmes sweetly. It is always awkward doing business with an alias. A flush sprang from the man's white cheeks to the stranger. Well then, said he, my real name is James Ryder. Precisely so, head attendant at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. Pray step into the cab, and I shall soon be able to tell you everything which with you know. The little man stood glancing from one to the other, was half frightened and half hopeful, as one who was not sure whether he was on the verge of a windfall or a catastrophe. When he stepped into the cab, and in half an hour we were back at the sitting room of Baker Street, nothing had been said during our drive but the high, thin breathing of our new companion, and the clasping and unclasping of his hands spoke of the nervous tension between them. Here we are, said Holmes cheerfully as we filed into the room. The fire looks variable reasonable in this weather. You look cold, Mr. Ryder. Pray, take the basket chair. I will just put my slippers before we settle this little matter of yours. Now then, you want to know what became of the goose? Yes, sir. Or rather, I fancy, of the goose. It was one bird, I imagine, in which you are interested. White, and the black bar around the tail. Ryder quivered with emotion. Oh, sir, he cried. Can you tell me where it went? It came here. Here? Yes, and the most remarkable bird it proved. I don't wonder that you have taken interest in it. I laid an egg before it was dead, the bonniest, brightest little blue egg that it's never seen. I have it here in my museum. Our visitor staggered to his feet and clutched the mantelpiece with his right hand. Holmes unlocked his trunk box and held up the blue carbuncle, which shone out like a star. With a cold and brilliant, many-pointed radiance, Ryder stood glaring and had a drawn face, uncertain whether to claim it or to disown it. The game's up, Ryder, said Holmes quietly. Hold up, man, or you'll get into the fire. Give an arm and back into the chair, Watson. He's not good-blooded enough to end for a felony of impunity. Give him a dash of brandy. So, now he looks a little more human. What a shrimp it is, to be sure. For a moment he had staggered and nearly fallen, but the brandy brought a tinge of color to his cheeks, and he sat staring with frightened eyes at his accuser. I have almost every link in my hands, and all the proofs I need, so there's little which you need tell me. Still, that little may be have cleared up and some of the case complete. You have heard, Ryder, that this bluestone is the Countess of Morcar's? It was Kathleen Cusick who told me of it, he said in a crackling voice. I see. Her ladyship's waiting maid. Well, the temptation of sudden wealth, so easily acquired, was too much for you, as it must have been better men before. But you were not so very scrupulous in the means you used. It seems to me, Ryder, that there is a making of a very petty villain in you. You know that this man, Horner, the plumber, which had been concerned in some matters before, and the suspicion would rest more readily upon him. What did you do then? He made some small job in a lady's room, you and your confidant Cusack, and you managed that he would be the man sent for. Then, when he had left, he rifled the jewelry case, raised the alarm, and had the unfortunate man arrested. He then Ryder threw himself down suddenly upon the rug and clutched my companion's knees. "For God's sake, have mercy!" he shrieked. "Think of my father, of my mother. It would break their hearts. I never went wrong before. I never will again. I swear it. I'll swear it on a Bible. Oh, don't bring me into court. For Christ's sakes, don't." "Get back into your chair," said Holmes sternly. "It is very well to cringe and crawl now, but you thought little enough of poor Horner on the dock for a crime in which he knew nothing." "Oh, fly, Mr. Holmes. I will leave the country, sir. Then the charge against him will break down." We will talk about that. And now let us hear a true account of the next act. What came to the stone into the goose, and how came the goose into the open market? Tell us the truth, or there lies your only hope of safety. Ryder pressed his tongue over his parched lips. "I will tell you just as it happened, sir," he said. "When Horner had been arrested, it seemed to me that it would be best to get away with the stone for once. For I did not know at the moment the police might take it into their heads and search me or the room. There was no place about the hotel where I could be safe. I went out as if on some commission, and made my way for my sister's house. She had married a man named Oakshott, and lived in Brixton Road, where she fattened fowls for the market. All the way there, every man I met seemed to be a policeman or a detective. And for all it was a cold night, sweat was pouring down my face before I came to Brixton Road. My sister asked me what was the matter and why I was so pale, but I told her that I had been upset by the jewel robbery at the hotel. Then I went into the backyard and smoked a pipe and wondered what I could do the best for it. I had a friend once called Maudsley, who went to the bad, and has just been suffering time in Pentonville. One day he had met me and talked me into the ways of thieves, and how they used to get rid of what they stole. I knew that he would be true to me, and so one thing and another made him give up mine to the rights on Kilbourne, where he lived, take me into my confidence. He would show me how to turn the stone into money, but how to get it to him safely, I thought in my agonies I had gone through coming from the hotel. I might at any moment be seized and searched, and there would be the stone in my waistcoat pocket. I was leaning against the wall at the time and looking at the geese, which were waddling around my feet, and suddenly the idea came to my head and showed me how I could beat the best detective that ever lived. My sister had told me some weeks before that I might be able to have the pick of her geese for a Christmas present, and I knew that she was always good at her word. I would take my goose now, and then I would carry my stone to Kilburn. There was a little shed in the yard, and behind it I drove one of the birds, a big, fine one with a barred tail. I caught it, and prying its bill open, I thrust the stone down its throat as far as my fingers could reach. The bird gave a gulp, and I felt the stone pass along its gullet down into its crop. But the creature flapped and struggled and came out to my sister to know what was the matter. So I turned to speak to her little brute, broke loose and fluttered along the others. "What are you doing with that bird, Jim?" she said. "Well," said I, "you said to give me one for Christmas, and I was feeling which one was the fattest." "Oh," said she, "we've set yours aside for you. Chin's bird, we call it. There's a big white one over yonder, about 26 of them, which makes one for you, one for us, and 2 dozen for the market." "Thank you, Maggie," says I, "but if it is all the same to you, I'd rather have that one that was just handed now." "The other's is good 3 pounds heavier," said she, "and we fattened it expressly for you."
Never mind, I'll have the other, and I'll just take it now, I said. Oh, just as you like, she said, a little huffed. Which is it that you want? The white one with the barred tail, right in the middle of the flock. Uh, very well. Kill it and take it with yours. Well, I did what she said, Mr. Holmes, and I carried the bird all the way to Kilburn. I told my pal that I had done, and he was a man with a very easy tell of things. Like, he laughed until he choked, and then we got my knife and opened the goose. My heart turned to water. There was a terrible mistake that occurred. I left the bird and rushed back to my sister's and hurried back to the yard. There was not a bird to be seen there. Where are they all, Maggie? I cried. Gone to the dealers, Jam. Which dealers? Breckenridge and Covent Garden. But there was another with a barred tail, I asked. The same one as I chose? Yeah, Jim. There were two bar-tailed ones. I could never tell them apart. Well, then, of course, I saw it all, and I ran off as hard as my feet could carry me to this man, Breckenridge. By the time I got there, the lot was sold at once, and not one would he tell me where they had gone. You heard him yourselves tonight. Well, he was always answering me like that. My sister thinks that I'm gone mad, and sometimes I think that myself. And now I am myself branded thief without ever having touched the wealth for which I sold my character. God help me. God help me. He burst into convulsive sobbings with his face buried in his hands. There was a long silence, broken only by his heavy breathing, and by the measured tapping of Sherlock Holmes's fingertips on the edge of the table. Then my friend rose and opened the door. "Get out," he said. "What, sir? Oh, heaven bless you. No more words. Get out." And no more words were needed. There was such a rush and a clatter upon the stairs, and a bang at the door, and the crisp rattle of running footfalls onto the street. "After all, Watson," said Holmes, reaching his hand to his clay pipe, "I am not retained by the police to supply their deficiencies. If Horner were in danger, it would be another thing, but this fellow will not appear against him, and the case must collapse. I suppose that I am committing a felony, but it is just possible that I am saving a soul. This fellow will not go wrong again. He is too terribly frightened. Send him to jail now, and you'll make him a jailbird for life. Besides, it is a season of forgiveness. Chance has put in our way the most singular and whimsical problem, and its solution and its own reward. If you will have the goods to touch the bell, Doctor, we shall begin another investigation, in which, also, a bird will be chief suspect."